Hello and welcome to another episode of 5 Alarm Task Force. I'm your host, Steve Green. Happy to be with you. Happy to have you with us, whether you are watching us on our YouTube video and or listening to the audio. Now, very important announcement. We are recording this on Tuesday, April 27th, Tuesday morning. And our guests today are retired Chief Dan Jones and Kelly Walsh. And they have a very big announcement they're going to make that's important for Wednesday morning, the 28th. So we're going to try to get this video posted today or the first thing tomorrow morning, one way or another, so that you can avail yourself of this big announcement. But let me tell you a little bit about our guests. Kelly Walsh. Kelly helps individuals and organizations achieve exceptional performance by applying specific tools and techniques that guide leadership development. She works on large-scale vision and strategy, but also deploys specific actionable steps that deliver measurable results. She has worked in a variety of industries, including for-profit, nonprofit, and city government, but her heart is with the public sector, where she can bring her strengths to the people who protect and serve our communities. Uniquely qualified to work with fire departments, Kelly has 20 years of experience in human resources, with 10 years as an HR partner, partially embedded to a 350-person municipal fire department in Mesa, Arizona. She holds a Master of Education degree and a major in counseling, is a certified leadership coach and mediator, and has worked in organizations as a recruiter, a leader, mentor, trainer, coach, and strategist. The development of future leaders and creating a culture of well-being for employees are at the cornerstone of Kelly's expertise. She has authored and is featured as an industry expert in articles published in the Wall Street Journal, Computer World, CEO Blog Nation, Huffington Post, and others. Our other guest, Chief Dan Jones. He entered the fire service in February of 1974 and rose through the ranks to retire as fire chief in 2015. The chief served for over 16 years in the Pinellas Park, Florida Fire Department before relocating to Chapel Hill, North Carolina in 1990 to become fire chief. Upon his retirement, the chief was the longest serving municipal fire chief in the state of North Carolina. Chief Jones has served on a variety of committees, councils, and boards at the local, state, and national levels. He is the former editor-in-chief of National Fire and Rescue magazine and is a past president for the International Society of Fire Service Instructors. He is a former special on-air commentator for CNN Headline News Network and Breaking Fire and Rescue Stories. He is a frequent emergency services conference speaker and is recognized throughout the fire service as an authority in the field of leadership, rearrangement, campus housing, fire safety, fire sprinklers, which he and I share dearly, and motorsports fire rescue, which we also share dearly. He was a great lecturer at the University of North Carolina. He was a guest lecturer at the probably great as well, at the University of North Carolina, and has taught or presented in 34 states, Canada, England, Germany, Botswana, and Scotland. The chief is the recipient of numerous awards, including Florida Fire Instructor of the Year, IAFC President Award, and North Carolina's highest civilian honor, the Order of the Longleaf Pine Award. Chief Jones attended St. Petersburg College, Alamance Community College, the National Fire Academy, the National Staff and Command Program at the University of Maryland, and the Institute of Governments at the University of North Carolina. Chief Jones has held up to 12 emergency services technical certifications. He currently resides in Chapel Hill with his wife of 45 years in a home they built with fire sprinklers. Kelly and Chief, it is a pleasure to welcome you back to 5 Alarm Task Force.
It's good to be with you.
Thanks for having us, Steve.
Well, it's my pleasure to have you guys back. You always generate great responses and ratings. Chief, you and I often connect on social media with our posts, especially on Twitter. And we talk about sprinklers a lot together, and we talk about NASCAR. And when I posted my post a couple of weeks ago about what happened on the fire, that we still are seeing our great first responders on the tracks, but going into a vehicle fire without wearing breathing apparatus. And that has got to change. We need that to change, because what's burning, especially the plastic in those cars, what's burning is just as bad as what we're facing in the general fire service.
Oh yeah, the synthetics are so toxic anymore.
Yeah, that's right. So the reason why they're back today, and I'm actually going to turn the show over to them a little bit, is we have this big announcement. So, Chief Dan Jones, would you please share it with our viewers and listeners?
Well, Steve, as you know, Kelly and I have been teaching for the last 5 years in the fire service, teaching leadership and management around the country. The last year during COVID, we've been online teaching, doing virtual classes, but we've had hundreds of students from scores of fire departments all across the country, large and small. And in the process of doing that, we've not only from our own experience, Kelly's experience and mine, have a lot of lessons to share, but our students have shared lessons with us as well. And so during COVID, when everybody was stuck at home and had extra time, Kelly and I kind of put our shoulder to the grindstone and got busy writing. And the result of that, we're excited to announce, is a new book called Facing the Fire, Stories to Ignite Leadership Excellence. And this will be released tomorrow, Wednesday, April 28th on Amazon. There's a special the first few days. You can download an e-copy for Kindle or other types of readers. For just 99 cents. That is a very short-term special that's going to be for the first few days. And then in a week or two, the paperback versions will be available. But what we've done is we've taken the lessons that we've learned over the years in firehouses and in other places, both our own experience, as we said, and some of our students, and we've applied those to leadership lessons. And we've put this book together. We're very excited about this. It's been a labor of love for both of us. And we feel like this book will be a useful tool for leaders, not only in emergency services, fire and EMS, but in other disciplines, because leadership is universal.
Right.
And we can learn from the lessons of our firefighter brothers and sisters, but you can apply those lessons in a variety of disciplines. And Kelly is an expert in how lessons translate across various disciplines because of her varied experience. And she can probably do a better job than I at explaining how that translates.
Kelly, if you will.
Sure. I just want to point out kind of the overarching theme of this book is we were fortunate to have Chief Dennis Compton write our foreword. And he, as you probably know, probably many of your listeners know, was the former chief of Mesa, Arizona Fire Department, worked with Chief Bernasini as an assistant chief, chairman of the National Fallen Firefighters Foundation, and I could go on. Anyway, he was kind enough to write our foreword, and he said something that I felt was a very important quote. And what he said is, through all his experience, 50 years in the fire service, 2 years in the U.S. Army, he said, he's come to realize that it's almost impossible for a group of people to outperform the quality of leadership they receive from their bosses. I'm going to repeat that because I think it's so important. He's come to realize that it's almost impossible for a group of people to outperform the quality of leadership they receive from their bosses. And when I read that, I was like, wow, that's just kind of our whole mission in a summary statement, you know? Sure. And so I've worked in fire service for a long time as a business partner, human resources, but I've also worked in large corporations, nonprofits, and the issues are the same. People are not given the preparation needed before they become leaders. And so you're the best firefighter, we're going to make you a captain. You're the best, teacher. We're going to make you principal of the school. And it's a whole different skill set. It's learnable, but we just take the smart person and we put them in that role, and they don't often succeed because of that. So this has become our mission, and our great love is to go around and spread the word on how to become a better leader.
Well, I think that's so important today. We see on social media, especially over the last, let's say, 5 years, sometimes this somewhat vitriolic debate online, which is easy to occur in social media because of anonymity for a lot of people. that, you know, they want to argue the two most important things in the fire service, which is firefighting tactics and leadership. And yet, most of the people, you know, a lot of the people are talking from their gut rather than their heart or their mind. And it's easy to jump on something and be negative if you don't understand it and you've never been in that situation. On the other hand, you hope and expect that the person guiding you, or who is supposed to guide you, prepares you with that knowledge that you need to have for both of those. You know, nobody is born a firefighter. Nobody's born a paramedic or an EMT. I've always said nobody is born with any hatred in their heart or in their mind,
That's
because
true.
hatred and bigotry are learned. They're not, you know, they're not part of the ethics we're born with as a baby. I see leadership, and I've said this, and you know, my article was published on firehouse.com a couple of years ago. That leadership, I look at leadership and how I trained in my nonprofit sector, which was my professional side, aside from my volunteer fire service duty, was that leadership, I think, I treated it like planting a seed. For you want to grow a vegetable in the garden during the spring and summer. So you put the seed in the soil, you have good soil, you have a little nutrients in it for it, you give it a water, a little sun. And then you take care of it. You check on it every couple of days. Then you wait for that first sprout. And then you take care of that sprout till it gets big. And then you transfer it from that little pot to a bigger pot, and you let it keep growing. And you nurture it and you help grow it. Well, we can do the same thing with leadership. But you can't say, I want to grow a sunflower and just grab it and shove it in the ground, and then it wilts and dies. And you say,
Walk away, yeah.
what did I do wrong? What's the matter with that? It should have happened. That's what we've done in many cases in leadership, especially in the fire service. I can't, you know, and as I said before we got on the air, I saw the same situation in nonprofit, Kelly, as you mentioned as well, and in big for-profit corporations. You know, in my nonprofit sector, people would be elected to the board, but they wouldn't, they thought their only responsibility was show up for the meeting, the monthly meeting. And I explained to them as the executive director, no, you can't, that's not the way it works. You have to take on a mantle of responsibility in our organization that you and maybe another co-chair would take care of and report to me, and we'd go over it and plan our activities and stuff like that. If we do it that way, it'll work out great. And so I did board training several places around the country, plus the places I worked at. And I started reading the book last night and this morning. I said, oh my God, this is exactly what I went through in nonprofit. It was the same thing. But it has a much bigger impact though in the fire service. Because if we don't have good leaders to lead the troops, then we're not going to do our job to the best of our ability, which is in the oath that we take to protect and serve our communities. And if we don't do that, we're in big trouble. And it doesn't make any difference whether you're a municipal department or the smallest rural department with one little old pumper and 6 volunteers. If you don't do the job right, you do for something on the negative side. And it all begins with leadership. And
Steve, we do such a good job in the fire service of teaching operational leadership.
Right.
Fireground, emergency scene, patient care leadership. That we've got that down pat in emergency services. We know what we're doing at an emergency scene. But you go back to the firehouse, or you go back to fire headquarters, and now you're dealing with an entirely different set of situations. And it involves everything from people issues to dollar issues to politic issues to ethical issues to project management. And what do we know about that?
Financial management.
Financial. It's just like Kelly said, you know, you take the lead, the best you have at the service delivery level, whatever that is, whether it's fire and emergency services, it's education, it's delivery services, it's production and manufacturing, it's nonprofit helping people, whatever that happens to be. But when people get up into that leadership level, it's very different. It's very, very different. And we do such a poor job most of the time of preparing people for that, that what we end up with is on-the-job training,
Right.
learning by mistake. What
Dan
a
calls
terrible
that-
way to run
Dan
an
calls it-
organization.
Dan calls that deep end of the pool learning.
Yeah, we throw people in the deep end to teach them how to swim, you know, and some manage to flail around and dog paddle and keep their head above water until they learn a stroke. Others don't. They go under. And then we go, gee, he was so good at what he did. Why did he drown in the deep end of the pool? Well, that's because he spent most of his time over in the shallow end of the pool. So what Kelly and I really our desire with this book is that leaders, potential leaders, rising leaders, people who aspire to be leaders can use this book and follow the lessons in it. We include questions at the end of each chapter to help people do a little introspection of themselves and their development. And our hope is that people can use this book to help develop those skills that are needed for leadership. And it's not that difficult, quite honestly. Leadership is hard, but learning the skills necessary to be successful at it is not that difficult. It's pretty basic and pretty simple.
Well, one of the things that we all three of us agree on, and we've talked about this before, is that when you join the fire service, whether it's volunteer, career, part pay, wildland, doesn't make any difference. You have to be willing to be a student in your entire career. You have to be willing to continue to learn. Now, you'll learn, as you said, Chief, operationally, fire tactics, safety, medical protocols, etc. And we, as you said, we have that pretty much down pat. But when you take a great captain, a line captain, who's done a great job with his team on the fire ground or on a wreck scene and does great, and then say, okay, we're going to make you a deputy chief in charge of budget and HR. Huh? That's, well, deputy chief, that sounds good. What's HR? You know, we make that jump, and those people simply are not prepared for that level of advancement that way, unless the two things that you mentioned. One, that the organization is willing to groom and train that person to make that transitional move, and that person is open to learning more about that side of the department and willing to take on that obligation.
You know, Steve, one of the points that Kelly likes to make when we're teaching, and she makes that point in this book as well, and I'll let her tell it because she can tell it better than I am, but in her HR role in various capacities over the years in different disciplines, most of the messes she had to clean up are the result of
Communication issues. Anything that turned into a lawsuit, just a meltdown, an argument, somebody quitting, somebody getting fired. I mean, any of those tragedies started as a communication moment gone wrong. And so fixing those at the time of the occurrence can save us time, money, stress, all kinds of things. And those are really simple things to jump on early if you have the skill set, or if you have access to tools and things, which is what Dan and I focus on with our training. And I just wanted to mention also, we call our training program Brave Fire Leader. You can look it up at bravefireleader.com. And we do that because obviously you're brave if you're in the fire service, but we believe it takes a special type of bravery to take on leadership, to take that step into that next level, and to it's humbling, it's difficult, and things will happen that have never happened before. Some new law or twist or pandemic or something is going to come up, and it takes a lot of courage to address those things, to look at oneself, and to work on these skills. So we want to just focus the fact that we believe it's an act of bravery even to step into the leadership roles.
Well,
Yeah, we talk about courage in leadership, and one of the points that we try to always make in both our teaching and in this book is, everybody recognizes the fire service for its courage and say, well, these men and women are willing to run into a burning building, or they're willing to climb a 10-story ladder to get to somebody, or they're willing to hang on a rope down a cliff face to get to somebody. Yes, that takes courage. But you know what also takes courage? Having a difficult conversation with a close employee, or giving constructive criticism to somebody who's not going to accept it very well. And a lot of times people in leadership, supervision, management roles, they shy away from that. They don't have the courage that's necessary to do that. And so leadership takes just as much courage. It might be a little different kind of courage, but courage nonetheless. And if you have the right skill set, as Kelly mentioned, it makes that courage come a little easier, because now you have some tools. Now you have a way to do those things that can work, and you have the confidence and the ability based on the lessons in this book, the lessons in our classes, to have that difficult conversation with an employee, or to correct something that's obviously wrong that somebody might take offense at, or to be able to spend extra time with a volunteer firefighter, as you've mentioned, Steve, in our many conversations, to mentor somebody and help them develop to their full potential and develop their skills. All of that takes courage. It takes courage, it takes energy, it takes foresight, and those are exactly the kinds of skills that Kelly and I share in this book.
Well, it's so important, and you just brought something to mind that I hadn't thought about in a long time. When we moved to Syracuse, I was given a job in a synagogue as ritual director. So I was doing a lot of teaching and stuff like that. But they put me in this little closet of a room, and it was on the total other side of the building. So anytime a parent or a child would call from lessons, one of the secretaries would have to walk all the way around because there was no phone. Yet I did see an Amphenol connector in that small room. So I asked permission. I said, if I can get a phone in there inexpensively, would it be okay? And the president said, yeah, sure. So I called the phone company. I told them, look, there's an Amphenol connector. He goes, how do you know it's an Amphenol? I said, because I know phone systems. I've been working with them for a while. He says, it probably leads right down to the board. I just don't have a tester down to take to the basement. He goes, oh, if you have a connector there, it should only be, a couple of dollars for the install and just, $3 a month extra on the bill. I said, okay, so let's do it. So we did it. And so about 3 weeks later, the president came to me and says, you did a hell of a job getting that phone put in for such an inexpensive price. I said, did you really bargain with them? I said, no, I didn't need to. I told them what we needed. I told them what was already here. And he said, okay. He says, how would you like to be our acting executive director? I said, huh? He says, well, we haven't had one in 10 years, and we need somebody who can do what you just did for the synagogue. I said, okay. He says, no, we're not going to raise your pay yet. This will be a trial.
Of course.
This contract year, and then we'll see how it goes for the next year. And I said, okay, that's fine.
Classic.
So I said, no, that was okay. But then 3 weeks after that, he comes to me and he's, no, it wasn't 3 weeks. I think it was 3 months after that. He comes to me and said, you're going to have to let so-and-so go. Now, they made one of the cardinal sins in nonprofit work is that you never hire an employee. You never hire a member as an employee. Because if you have to terminate that member, they're going to be angry. They're going to leave the organization altogether. And there were 2 older women who were the basic secretaries, and there was one other woman in the office who was the receptionist and the bookkeeper. And they said, you have to let this one go. And I said, why do I have to do it? I've only been here, 4 or 5 months. You're the president of the congregation. I didn't hire her. They said, well, you have to let her go. So I looked I went to the library to look up human resources and to see if I could find anything. You know, this was before the internet. This is 1981. How do I let somebody go nicely? So I couldn't find anything. Called my older brother, who was a rabbi. I said, "What do I do?" He says, "Try to be as nice as you can and as compassionate as you can about it." I said, "Okay." So instead of calling her into my office, I just went to her desk and sat very close with her and sat with her and explained the situation as they had told me. And she gave me a hug and a kiss. And she said, "I know this isn't you, but thank you. I loved working here with you." And that was my lesson. You know, that was the first time I had to do something like that. I had hired teachers in the synagogue where I had worked as a direct education director. Never had to let anybody go. But being brand new in this COO position and having to do that within just a couple of months of getting it was difficult. And I still felt guilty for months afterwards because I didn't agree with the reason, but I couldn't challenge the board. So,
You know, though, Steve, that's a sign of compassionate leadership when you feel bad about having to let someone go, even when they've caused it.
Mhm.
You know, I've had to terminate a number of people during my career as a deputy chief and a fire chief. And even when they've done stuff that they really terminated themselves by their actions or their
right.
words or whatever, you still feel bad about it. I worked with a chief officer one time many years ago who enjoyed firing people. He thought it was a fun thing, and he was kind of on a power trip about it. And I never forgot that, and the way he treated people. And I thought, boy, if there's an example of poor leadership, because when you terminate somebody, you're not just terminating their job, you're terminating their income, the way they pay their bills. You may be taking food off the table for their family. You may be affecting their rent or their mortgage payments. And even when they've done something really stupid or really bad that caused that termination, compassionate leaders still will feel badly about that, that it came to that point. And what I say to leaders is, if you have to severely discipline an employee or a volunteer, or you have to terminate somebody and it bothers you, that's a good thing. It's a good thing that it bothers you, because that means you're a compassionate leader.
Right. And I think that's what we often miss in leadership today, is still having compassion, even if you're at that upper level, that you still have to understand where you came from.
You have to care about people.
Yeah, you have to care about the people.
And, you know, Kelly's had a lot of experience with this too in HR, particularly in the private sector, where, you know, they've had layoffs of large numbers of people and stuff. And that usually gets delegated down to HR to be the bad news deliverer. Right. And, you know, they don't make the decisions of who gets terminated or why they're having to do layoffs, but yet they have to be the deliverer of bad news, sort of like you were. And Kelly still talks about that. And I can tell when she talks about it in her classes and stuff, I can tell that it bothers her that they were put in that position. And I don't want to put words in her mouth, but I think I've read that right. Haven't I, Kelly?
Oh yeah. I mean, you can't help the situation necessarily, but I've always felt like, I feel this way about a lot of things. I feel this way about layoffs. I feel this way about education, discipline. Even if, you know, every promotion you have, every hiring you do, there's a bunch of people that weren't hired or weren't promoted and are going to feel badly about that. Right. So, you know, and there's many more of those than there are the people who made it. So it's, you know, compassion and just, I always say, like, it's really important to keep the H in HR, the human side of human resources. And just to let people know, you know, that it's hard for you. Here's something they could have done, you know, whatever you can do to kind of be as human about that. It's a woman I used to work with years ago. We called her the Velvet Hammer. She used to, like, people were like you, like she gave a great response when she'd have to give them news, because she found a way to do it that really resonated with them, helped them look forward, helped them understand. And even when I've had to give disappointing news about not getting a job or not getting a promotion, I feel like I want to let people know why, not just what, because most people, even if they don't like the decision, they want to at least feel like they've been treated fairly.
Right.
And I think most people, maybe not that day, but they'll get to that if you give them some information to help them feel like they've been treated fairly.
Right. I think, yeah, that's very, very important. And again, that's part of the communication you mentioned before, that you need straight and truthful communication at all times. You can't.
And consistent, like consistent organizational communication. You can't just like have a newsletter one day that you've never done a newsletter before. And it, you know, like it has to be trusted, reliable, consistent communication. That's the organizational side. And then the interpersonal side is the how are we treating each other?
Right.
How are we developing each other? Are we, if you have to let someone go or there's a discipline situation, have we done everything we can do to make sure that they're developed, that they had the opportunities to be the best that they could?
Right.
So
Right.
share that responsibility.
You know, Chief, I want to go ahead, sir.
Steve, when we come back from the break, one of the things that Kelly and I would like to share with you is some of the interesting and funny names of our chapters. I think people will be intrigued when they read our table of contents and they see some of the names. They're going to go, what? What is that about? But
love that.
Once we have a chance for people to either read it or explain it to them, they'll get it. They'll understand that, okay, that was kind of a funny way to describe it, but it does describe it.
Right. Before we jump, I wanted to just go back on something you said that was a perfect example. You said operationally in the fire service and EMS, we have our act together operationally. And we saw that with this pandemic. You know, it was just a year ago that we were together. And yet we saw, and unfortunately, Chief Billy Goldfeder, who keeps talking about communication, is one of the greatest communicators in the fire service, just posted yesterday in Close Calls email that we have lost 123 firefighters to COVID as of yesterday, and I think it was 59 EMS personnel. But we never hesitated. We figured out ways to get our PPE and keep protect our rigs and sanitize them after we've run these calls. We didn't stop answering calls. People called 911. We were there. We answered the call in the midst of the pandemic, and it took a very heavy toll on our members. That was operationally. But then we look at the overall picture of, okay, we did our job. Now let's let the upper level take care of the administration, the medication, the vaccination, and set us up for delivery. And that didn't even begin to match up to the level that the fire and EMS services rose to in the pandemic.
Yeah, but you know what, Steve? The last year has been tragic on a lot of levels because of this pandemic. And it's been very challenging to the delivery of public safety and emergency services because we don't have the luxury of working from home.
Right.
We don't have the luxury of saying, we're not doing deliveries now. We're not coming out to your house. We'll just talk to you over the phone or chat with you on the computer to tell you how to handle your emergency. We don't have that luxury. So the service continued as you described. We innovated ways. I've read scores of stories about hazmat teams that came up with ways to sanitize rigs and so forth and protect fire stations through just individual innovation. But one of the prouder things that I think of emergency services does come out of leadership, and that is that emergency services stepped up and has staffed or managed and led most of these. They worked hand in hand with the health departments around the country to manage vaccination sites and testing sites, and firefighters and paramedics were delivering vaccinations and doing COVID testing. and you see incident command systems being used to manage and run these mass vaccination sites. I think that has gone a little bit unnoticed, but I think in the history of fire and emergency services, and particularly from a leadership perspective, that could be one of our proudest periods of time.
Absolutely.
The fact that the emergency services was able to step in, fill in this void. You know, the local health departments and state health departments are dramatically understaffed. They could not have done this by themselves. And emergency services partnered with them and helped deliver those necessary public health services.
Even when they were understaffed and had people in quarantine, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, exactly.
When we got our shots,
fire departments that had to double up shifts and triple up shifts just to keep people on the rigs, and they did it. They did it, and they found ways to lead through it in their communities. And I think from a leadership standpoint, fire and emergency services across the country deserves a star for that.
absolutely. When I needed to call rescue when I was sick in November, they know me as a former firefighter, and they were, you know, I told the dispatch when I called that this is my situation, but my background, and she says, okay, we're going to let them know. And rescue showed up, and they, oh, it's you? Oh, we didn't think this was you. And, and the care was phenomenal, and just terrific. I kind of, aged myself. I don't know if I mentioned this yesterday, but in the rig, since I knew I was dehydrated, I asked the medic in the back with me, I said, do you guys still have to call control for starting an IV? He goes, wait a second, how long have you been out? And I said, probably longer than you've been in. He goes, yeah, we gave up having to call control, but 25 years ago, we can just start an IV if we deem it necessary. And yet when we went to get our shots, my wife and I both have both of them in. It was our local fire department, and some of the people from my station right down the street from me who were there right at the mall around the corner from our home. They're delivering the shots, and same thing. You're here? Oh, good. Okay, we'll take care of you. And it was great because they were the ones doing the injections and the vaccinations and the registration. They were there. I mean, dozens of them were there to help manage our local site. And every time I tried, both times I was there, and as many as I saw, I said, thank you, thank you, thank you. For I know this might not be your day on, but you're here for the extra shift. Thank you for being here. Thank you for taking care of us. Because it was terrific. The organization of our vaccination site was absolutely terrific. I couldn't think of anything better. And they processed you, and they were sweet. They were compassionate. These were just the first do firefighters and rescue people, but you'd think they had years and years of compassion, learning and experience, because that's how kind and compassionate they were.
Absolutely.
So kudos to my Coral Springs Parkland Fire Department, because they were terrific. All right, folks, we're going to take a quick break. If you're watching the video, you won't see anything different. If you're listening to the audio, we'll be right back right after these words. So please stay tuned. And we're back with my guest, Chief Dan Jones and Kelly Walsh. And we are talking about their new book, Facing the Fire, Stories to Ignite Leadership Excellence. And though I will admit I do not have the opportunity to read the entire book yet, just the first couple of chapters, the foreword by Chief Dennis Compton, as Kelly had mentioned, is amazing. And it says a great deal about the two people who are my guests today, and why they put this book together, its goal, the opportunity. Please don't forget, if you missed the first part, that we're recording this on Tuesday the 27th, beginning tomorrow, Wednesday the 28th. The book will be, electronic version of the book will be available for 99 cents for the first few days. You can download it for either a Kindle or another electronic reader. And then next week, the paperback will be available as well. And we've been talking about some of the key points that they've brought up. And we briefly discussed education and how important it is. And on social media, I've been a big proponent, having been a lifelong educator myself, of that every firefighter, once you're appointed, once you join, again, whether you're a career volunteer, if you want to be a successful firefighter, even if you have no aspirations for going higher than being frontline, you got to always be open to learning. You got to be open to more education. You have to be willing to reach out yourself and look for a class. You want to learn how to tie knots better. You want to learn hydraulics better. Look for a class locally, regionally, or nationally. And it's important for you to understand that sometimes you'll do it on your own dime. But I will tell you that if you do it and it's the right conference, it'll pay you back in spades with the knowledge that you'll acquire that will prepare you to be either the better firefighter, or if you take the other courses, towards leadership. It's not easy. It's not easy, especially if you're an active firefighter, you have a family maybe, and you have other things going on. But if you make that commitment, and we talked a little bit off here just now between the segments about if you can make that commitment today, where we have so much more available, where sometimes you don't even have to travel. You can sit in your den, in your living room, in your kitchen. You can take a course for 3 weeks and get a certification in that course right from your own home. Soon, God willing, most of the pandemic will be gone, and we'll be back to a new normal for us. It'll give us more opportunities. But education will be the key to your success as a leader. Because as we said in the beginning, nobody is born a leader. Leaders are groomed either on their own or by other leaders who see the best qualities in a person. And I think you
Steve,
said,
we start the book off talking just about this, Pathways to Leadership in
Right.
Chapter 1. And we talk about the ways that leadership needs to be developed and what's missing in our leadership today in many, not just fire and emergency services, but a lot of disciplines, and how you can fill those gaps in. And, as you said, there's all kinds of opportunities to do that anymore. There's a quote, and I don't remember where I first heard this or where it's from, but I've always remembered this. And it's a short quote, and it's leaders are learners. And learning is a lifelong process. You can't go to the academy and go get a couple of certifications post-academy and say, okay, I know what I need to know for my fire service career. It's just not that simple anymore. When you and I started in the fire service back in the 70s, the fire service was a pretty narrow discipline.
mm-hmm.
We learned some basic first aid, forcible entry, hose streams, ventilation, fire flow, hydraulics, and a little bit of rescue skills, and you were good to go. Well, that's not the case anymore, because a lot of fire departments, in fact, most fire departments, consider themselves full service, which means they don't just extinguish fires. They provide emergency medical service. They provide health care. They provide environmental protection services. They provide event management in many communities. They provide general safety input in a lot of communities. They're involved in community planning and economic development. They're involved in public education on a lot of different levels. We're involved in safe traffic safety things with bike schools and child safety seat programs. So the learning process, even for a frontline firefighter, is a lot more involved and a lot more evolved than it was just 20 or 30 years ago. And that learning has to continue. Now, if you throw in, well, gee, I'd like to be a lieutenant, or I'd like to be a captain, or maybe a battalion chief, and you get a little further along in your career and you watch the leadership of your department and you say, I think I can do that. I want to be an assistant chief or a deputy chief. Well, there's a lot more life skills and leadership skills that are necessary to go to that level. Kelly and I like to relate a story about one of our students. We were teaching a class down in Louisiana, and we had a student in the class who was
We were actually in Arkansas, and he
Was it
drove from Louisiana.
Arkansas? Okay, he was from
Mhm.
Louisiana, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, the class was in Arkansas. You're right. We're looking at a student sitting in the back row that is probably close to my age, if not the same age I am. And we're not going to say what that is,
Right.
but a silverback, a fire service silverback.
Experience. It's not about age.
Let's just put it that way. And so when we start the class and we go around and do introductions, it turns out that this gentleman has over 40 years in the fire service. He's a deputy chief, second in command of a large metropolitan department. And he's sitting in our leadership class.
And
Not
he
only
paid for
at-
himself.
Go ahead, Kelly.
Just a reminder, Dan, he self-paid. Most people
That's right.
on their department, he self-paid.
He sent himself to the class and paid for it himself. Now, a lot of people would say, gee, a 40-year plus veteran deputy chief metro department, why do they need to sit in a leadership class? And he explained it very well to the class. You never stop learning. You never stop learning. And we had some pretty puff chest young lieutenants in this same class from departments who thought they were pretty big stuff and that some of our leadership lessons were going to be beneath them until this gentleman spoke. And once he spoke and explained who he was and his background and why he was in the class, those young puffed out chest lieutenants got very quiet. It was an interesting dynamic to watch, and Kelly and I have related that story over and over. And
Great story.
And the gentleman, the deputy chief, has stayed in touch with us and communicates with us from time to time. And is not only that, he sends people he's mentoring to our classes. So you talk about an example of why you never stop learning. He is the epitome of that, and he has both our respect for that, for that piece that he played.
That's a great story, and I think that it's one that I hope our listeners and viewers will take to heart right away. That no matter what your goal is in the fire service, you can set any goal you want for yourself, but you have to remember you've got to be learning the entire way towards that goal. And that chief story is the best example you could come up with. Terrific.
Kelly does a lot of promotion preparation for senior officers, and it's interesting. People with more than 20 years experience at this job, and they're going for higher ranked positions, and when they team up with Kelly for her to prepare them for promotion to help them compete, it's interesting the things that she has to help them with to advance to the next level.
Kelly, why don't you talk about that a little bit, please?
Yeah, I mean, and this is all levels. I've helped people who are going for the captain testing. Sometimes they missed it last time by one person and they want to get an edge. And so a lot of it is just confidence and practice. So I have a bank of questions that have actually been used over the years, and it's getting the practice out working with me versus getting the practice out when you're actually having your interview. So I help them, even if they have a great answer, I help them figure out how to put a cherry on top. Like, how can you make this fantastic? And if it's not so good, we talk about that. And so I've had chiefs who are like heir apparents who are going for a chief job, and you'd think, oh, they're good, but they just haven't sat down maybe to think about what their leadership style is, what the main core issues of the department are, and what they're going to be able to bring to that, lay out a 90-day plan, things like that. So it's just, I believe we're all so tied up in the moment and going and running, and we're all moving so fast that it's hard to sit down sometimes and be like, what are my beliefs? Why am I doing this? How can I communicate this in a way that shows who I am as a human being and the heart side, not just the technical side, things like that. I just had I'd love to announce these on our page when we get them, but we just had a guy this past week who got promoted to captain in the Berkeley Fire Department, and he's super excited. And he, right before that, I had a guy in a small town in Arizona, and he I love him because he told me that his personal motto was he wanted to make prevention sexy again. And I was like, good for you. Someone's got to do that. Anyway, but he learned how to position his answers. He had all the answers. It was just how do you say them? I'm not telling you the answers. I'm just telling you how to say them. His board said not only was he the best interview they had that day, they said it was the best interview he had had ever. So again, that's just another type of learning, being willing to learn and listen to what's good about what you're saying and what isn't. Typically we know it, it's in our soul, we know why, but we just need to say it because the interview boards can't assume that you know it if you don't
Right.
say it.
Sure.
And this is a little bit, applies a little bit to the second chapter in the book, Steve, that Kelly wrote that talks about being the message. How you communicate and how you portray yourself to others, not only for promotion interviews, but just in everyday leadership situations. And
not with just words, but with actions and tone, because that matters even more than words.
That's the next note on my pad, be the message. I wrote that down because it's such a strong and positive recommendation to somebody who's looking to promote. Be the message. Don't just talk about it. You have to be it.
We have a lot of people in the fire service, a lot of chiefs in the fire service who know the right buzzwords. They know the things to say, but they don't demonstrate that with their personal actions. And that's where the leadership breaks down.
And I'll give you a real simple example of that, Dan. And that's like, I'll have people who say, well, I have an open door policy and I believe in having an open door. Well, you can have an open door, but if people are afraid to come through it, it's not an effective open door. You have to create a way that draws people, that people want to come share something with you. You're gonna coach them, you're gonna mentor them, you're gonna give them something. They're gonna leave better than they came in. And that's what matters more than whether the door is open or not. And not everybody realizes that. So the open door policy is only as good as how inviting you are as a person.
You know, at the beginning of the book, that first story about the new assistant chief who came in, and the chief walked into his office and dropped the budget from the previous year. I think it's a great story. I'd like you to tell our listeners and viewers about that. And then I'd like to follow that up, Chief, with your story of when you were at Chapel Hill, and explain how vast the touch of a fire chief had to expand to work with an entire community.
Yeah. The story that you're referring to in chapter 1 is a story that I have experienced, but in Kelly and I's classes over the years, we've had numerous chief officers repeat virtually the same story back to us, that they've had a very similar experience. And the story goes something like this. You take a battalion chief off the line and you promote him to assistant chief in administration, and you move him into a 10 by 12 office and give him a bookcase and a desk and a phone, and maybe they now have a car, and they say, well, you're now the assistant chief. We've given you 3 bugles or 4 bugles or whatever that department uses to designate that. We have a little promotion ceremony and a swearing in, and we give you a 2-page job description that was written by somebody in HR. No offense, Kelly. And we say,
don't do
okay.
it alone.
We say, okay, you're the assistant chief now. Here it is. And so the first week or two, you're trying to kind of figure out what it is you're responsible for. And one day, the fire chief walks in, and he's got a budget book in his hand from last year. And he drops the budget book on your desk and he says, well, chief, now that you're assistant chief, one of your duties is to prepare our budget for next year. And here's last year's budget. You can use this as a guide and go ahead and get started on it. It's due in 6 weeks to finance and the city manager. And go ahead and prepare us a budget for next year. And I'll give you a list of things I want included in it, but you go ahead and put it together. And assistant chief says to the new assistant chief says to the fire chief, well, sir, I've never even seen the budget before. Who can help me with this? And the chief goes, well, you know, the assistant chief that just retired, that got you promoted, he left for the islands and he's not really reachable. And so you'll figure it out. Go ahead and get started on it, and walks out of the room. And that's how we learn too many things. That's how we learn. And, you know, now this person who's never even seen the budget book before is got to prepare the budget, which is the financial lifeblood of your organization for the next 12 to 18 months. They have to prepare that and prepare presentations for the city manager or county commission or whoever to convince them of what spending is necessary to sustain emergency services in the community. And we wonder why we never get ahead. We wonder why we struggle with things like this. And if nobody's ever put a budget together, it is very involved. You got to figure out things like overtime and benefits and how much is fuel going to cost for the coming year, and how many tires on fire trucks are going to have to be replaced, and what payments are due on past fire trucks, and is there going to be a pay raise, and how is that going to be calculated in, and cost of living, and oh gee, the power company is going to raise the rates, so now we got power bills to pay on 5 stations. How do we figure that out? That's a hell of a way to do business.
And what that is that's the learning gap. And it happens in the budget situation and a million other things. We have a gap in, and so the person who keeps coming in has to keep inventing the wheel. So how are we going to go beyond ourselves? How are we going to plan for the future, the vision that fire can be in a community? How are we going to get there if we keep catching up with ourselves?
Right. And yeah, it's like 2 steps forward, 1 step back.
Yep.
In that. So let's get to the story about the greater Chapel Hill area when you were chief, and this problem that was dropped on your desks, so to speak.
Yeah, there was one particular summer. Chapel Hill, North Carolina is a university community, so a lot of infrastructure work has to be done in the summertime when the colleges are out, because that's when traffic is the least. And Chapel Hill and the neighboring community and the state Department of Transportation and the university were all planning road projects for this particular summer. And they were all in a particular area on the south side of town. And they were going to intersect to some degree. And it was really going to screw up morning commute and normal traffic patterns. And you basically have got 4 different projects going on that are overlapping each other, run by different superintendents, with different timelines, different contractors, everything. City manager comes to me and says, that system you guys use to run things, you use it for the festivals, you use it for the football games, and you use it for big fires and stuff. What do you call that system? It's the incident command system, sir. Yeah, you think you could apply that system to these road projects and coordinate some of that work? Maybe assign one of your officers to it? And I'm sitting there thinking, now what do fire officers know about road projects? We don't know anything about road projects or road building or road renovation. But he was looking for the coordination aspect of it, the management leadership piece. And so we agreed, me somewhat reluctantly, to assign a deputy chief to set up an incident management system for these 4 road projects and pull the various folks together involved, contractors, public works, state DOT, police, PIOs for public information purposes. And they created a incident management plan and had regular coordination meetings, and the deputy chief acted as the coordinator or the incident commander for the whole thing. Did he need to know how to build a road? No, all he needed to know was how to manage and coordinate and lead these various agencies working together, which is what we do in the fire service. And he pulled it off, and the projects worked, and every morning they put out public alerts about which direction roads would be open for commuting purposes and where the blockages would be. And they coordinated the movement of heavy equipment and so forth so that they weren't double blocking up roads and so forth. And they got it done and it worked. And that's actually chapter 9 in our book, is that story and how the incident command system can be repurposed into using it for other things. And if we teach that incident command system to other government department heads and supervisors and so forth, they can learn to use that system to manage major projects and intra-agency cooperation efforts and everything from fun festival street events with Parks and Rec to road projects with Public Works to you name it. So yeah, it works. And the fire service is the expert at it. Kelly likes to tell our students that in the private sector, if corporate executives understood ICS and could put together a coordinating system as fast as the fire service can do it and manage an incident, a project, whatever in that coordinated fashion, they would kill for that skill and ability. And we don't even think about it. And in fact, in the fire service, we don't think about it off the fire ground. We don't think about how we could use that to do other things. But there are communities that are beginning to use that to manage a variety of things. And here's a skill set that the fire service, emergency services has that they can bring to a community to help with a wide variety of things. What is it? It's added value for the fire service. It makes the fire service more valuable in the community.
Absolutely.
When they see we can provide that type of coordination and help for things that aren't emergency in nature at all.
That's great. It's a great story. And I think it certainly underscores the fact that a fire service leader has to be open to thinking outside the box. We know we can do it on the fire ground of the emergency scene, but what about in day-to-day ops in our communities? And that's the story that says, yes, we can. We have the ability, if we're willing to think a little bit wider than just a firehouse and see what we've learned, we can share with other people and teach them and guide them on the same road that we went on when we first came to it.
It's a little bit like our third chapter in the book called Feeding the Elephants. Now, if you read that in the text, in the context of the table of contents, and you go, feeding the elephants, what does feeding the elephants have to do with the fire service or leadership? But feeding the elephants is about logistics, and nothing happens without logistical support. And so leaders have to recognize you can be a great leader. You can communicate well, as Kelly teaches, and be the message and convince people to go along with what you want to do. But if you don't put the support systems in place to make that happen, it's going to fail. And so you have this balancing act that's necessary for successful leadership. And it involves other things besides the leadership skill itself. It involves things like logistics and support systems and making sure that everybody's on the same sheet of music and understands what the mission and purpose is for everything you do, not just providing emergency services.
I think, as I have to admit, I did not have the opportunity just to read the entire book overnight, but I'm sure in the book, knowing the two of you as I do, that there's going to be something about don't doubt yourself. If you aspire for more, don't doubt yourself.
I think there's some of that through the whole book. And
Yeah.
Kelly and I both have had experiences ourselves where we doubted ourselves, but found a way to make things work. And there's several chapters in the book that would address that. And not doubting others as well. There's an interesting chapter 8 in the book, which is judging short skirts. Now that might raise a few eyebrows in fire service and in other disciplines. They go, what? Leadership judging short skirts in today's atmosphere. What is that about? Kelly, you want to explain what judging short skirts is about?
Yeah, this sort of stemmed from a scenario, real life scenario that happened to me where I was in my office in the fire department, and I was getting captain results ready. So, I mean, I had 20 candidates lurching at my door waiting for we used to kid around that, like, if I ever had an accident with the results in my car, they'd all step over me to get results. So anyway, big deal trying to get all that stuff done and let people know how the list came out. That was happening. Then I get a phone call, and there's a it's OSHA on the phone because they think something was stolen off of a vehicle or medical vehicle, and they were concerned that was a public health hazard. So, okay, so I don't even know how to begin to deal with that. So I'm kind of just juggling. And suddenly this woman comes into the doorway, and she's standing there and she's crying. And I'm like, oh my gosh, well, what, are you okay? I'm like, are you okay? Because I'm on two phones. And she's like, no. And so I could tell I had to stop what I was doing. So I stopped what I was doing, and I told people I'd call them back, and I invited her in, and I said, please tell me what's happening. And she said, is my skirt too short? And I was like, wow, really? And she said, my boss thinks it is. I don't think it is. And I want to know what you think. And so, I got OSHA on the phone, and I really, it just didn't seem important in that moment. But again, everybody's emergency is important to them, right? So I'm glad I stopped. And I did follow up with her issue, because what she was worried about was they being out of uniform or being out of dress code. She got points against her, and she could have lost her job if she got disciplined her. So it was about her job. So to her, it was an emergency. So we did handle that. But the magic of that moment for me was I realized, when am I the girl in the short skirt? When are you the girl in the short skirt? When do we go to our chief or go to our city manager or whomever and be like, hey, got this great idea. We can save 10 seconds on response times if we just do this. And it's a timing issue. They might be like, great, come sit down. Or they may have a garbage strike and a police occurrence that's causing a lot of media issues. And they don't really, if I don't plan good timing for that, or if I'm too tone deaf to realize other things are happening, there's more departments than just mine, I'm less likely to be successful at the things I'm putting forward. I can rather not be the girl in the short skirt and go in, and if I understand all these other things, how can we help you? So it just, the episode kind of gave me a laugh, because I realized, like, I do that. So anyway.
And the fire service does that.
Yeah.
We think our issues are the biggest, most important, most critical because they're emergency based. But in the whole aspect of a community, maybe that issue is not the hot issue of the moment. And
maybe it will be tomorrow, like the fire
yeah, exactly.
for you.
Right. Right.
So you have to understand timing issues. And Kelly said to me the other day, we were talking about this chapter, and she said, part of what I realized was that this was an emergency to this young lady, and it needed to be addressed. And as a leader, if you completely blow those things off, what happens the next time when that person really does have an issue that you need to be aware of or need help with? And so, we don't get to determine, and I'm stealing a little bit of Kelly's thunder here, but we don't get to determine what somebody else's emergency is. They decide it's their emergency.
Right.
Just like in the field, right?
Absolutely.
Just like in the field.
Absolutely.
And as leaders, we have to respond appropriately to the level that person is at. We don't get to decide that as leaders.
And that's what Chief Brunocini basically boiled it all down to when he taught us that our job is to take care of Mrs. Smith on her worst day, even if that worst day is her cat up a tree.
Yes.
And that's
the hot water heater has leaked all over the wood floor, or
right.
Whatever it is. It's minor to us and we won't remember it. But to those people that had that incident, they'll remember that the rest of their lives, and they'll share it repeatedly.
Tell the story of how they were treated, whether it was good or not good.
Absolutely. I have a friend who was who was a captain in a fire department, and we got together at a conference, and he said, "Well, you know, I don't think I'll ever make battalion chief." And I said, "Why?" He goes, "Well," he showed me this video, and he was the acting BC on that call that night at a strip center, and but you know, they could see through the glass that there was a fire inside a restaurant, look right around where the fryer would be. And he sent guys up to the roof, and he said, you know, cut me 3 lines and let me see what's going on upstairs. So they cut a line and said, "Chief, we got fire on the first line." He goes, "Okay, go back 30 feet, give me another cut. Cut. Chief, we got fire there." Goes, "All right, go to the back and give me the fire. Yeah, we got fire here." He goes, "All right, get off the roof, and we'll attack it." And it really got going, but out of, I think it was 9 stores, they saved 5 of them. And then he said, "Yeah, I failed." I said, "You failed?" I said, "Look, I was never an officer, but watching that and you telling me you did everything that any other BC would do. You had to determine, was there spread and the best way to attack that fire. And you saved 5 of the shops there. That's people, their livelihood, their families. You saved that." He goes, "Yeah." I said, "Yeah. Yeah, look at the success of what you did rather than where you think you failed. You know, if that had been burnt down to the ground, okay, that's something else. But it wasn't. You saved people's investments, you saved their families by saving that." And a year and a half later, he was appointed battalion chief, one of the battalion chiefs in his department. So I think that whole story about don't doubt yourself. If you have that wish, move ahead with it and go. If you go to somebody, that might be your emergency. And hopefully that leader that you go to will understand that and will, if they have at that moment, will address it. Or, "Hey, that's a good idea. Let's talk about it. I'm tied up right now, but how about tomorrow at 10 a.m.? Are you available to we'll come in and talk about tomorrow at 10 a.m. I'd love to hear it." Don't doubt yourself if you have that idea to make yourself or where you are better, because that's how we all grow. We all grow together when we do that. I think, and then that whole thing would be the message. I think even that story with the skirt, she was the message, because she was able to bring another point of view to you that you saw that, wait a second.
Well, yeah, you have to be the message. The main thing there is bring your words and actions together. They have to be consistent. So kind of like I was saying, if I had an open door, but blew her off because I had something more important going on, that would have been the wrong. Then message am I being? I'm being like, don't come in unless, you know, I say it's okay.
Okay.
That's not what we're there for.
With my limited reading that I got to do, what else can you just share briefly with our listeners and viewers to entice them more a little bit?
One thing I'd like to mention, so there's some, you know, there's a mix of things in here. Some are funny, some are poignant, some are, you know, some are what?
Some are tragic.
Some are tragic. But in some show us in hero light, and some show us in, like, you know, shouldn't have done that. But the whole point of it is this book is a tool itself. We tell a story, and actually it's fairly a brief story. We give leadership lessons, is the next part, and then coaching questions. And I'm an executive coach, and, you know, Dan and I coach and mentor all of our students. And it's really important to make the information sticky. You know, when you learn things, it's like, oh, that's interesting. But if you want to really make it stick and really have a change, interact with that. So look at those coaching questions. And there's even an area to, if you have the paper copy, there's even an area to Q&A yourself and do some self-reflection. So, you know, because stuff is going to happen all the time. It does, you know, from our lives, like there's crazy things, there's tragic things, funny things. That's life in the fire service, right? But how do we learn from all these things? How do we take these stories and then do something better? You know, I have one in here about a really bad fight between 2 deputy chiefs. And I totally, from the outside, I came in to do a cultural study. I could absolutely see how this happened. They couldn't see what was wrong, and it was impacting the whole department. So I talk about that story and how we resolved it. And again, it's not to make everybody look perfect. This stuff happens, right? Teams have conflict. It often happens because we're doing the right things. We're bringing diverse opinions together and things like that. So it's all okay. We just got to learn how to manage it and learn how to lead people through it. So, so a lot of fun stories, but the overall message is that the book is a tool. So you can just read it for enjoyment, or you can read it to work on your leadership. And actually, we even have classes and things as well if you want to even take a step further and learn some more for yourself. But this is a great tool for somebody who wants to prepare for promotion, something like that.
I think it's also a great tool for the person to improve themselves. Just
Absolutely.
even if they don't have the desire to advance yet, it's going to help them be a better person and a better firefighter or EMS
team
person.
member.
Right, team member, whatever, because they're learning from life stories how to be better.
Yeah, and Steve, one of the points I'd like to make is that all the stories we use in this book are real. Yeah. These are things that really happened. They either happened to Kelly and I, or we had firsthand knowledge of it, or they're things that happened to people we know, that they shared the stories with us. So when you talk about leadership, one of the best ways to learn is to learn from real life experiences of other leaders.
Sure.
And that's what we try to provide in this, is lessons learned through real life experiences. So I think even people not in the fire service, they'll be able to relate with the way we wrote this book, and our editor, Leslie Flowers, helped us with this, is to write it in a way that even people who are not firefighters or not in the fire service can draw leadership lessons out of this and will enjoy the stories. They'll get something out of the stories. They're written in a way that are easily understandable for not just people in the fire service, for people outside the fire service, and written in a way that they can draw the leadership lessons directly out of it. And that's how we structured it. We tell the story, we give the leadership lessons. As Kelly said, there's coaching questions at the end of each chapter to help with introspection and help you to put it in perspective. And we really hope people can use this for self-improvement, for promotion, for organizational development, for their own self-improvement, basically, for lack of a better term.
No, I don't think it's lack. I think it is a great term for self-improvement, because.
And we've even had people in our classes. We've had some folks in our classes come back and say to us, even my wife says the stuff you learn in here helps. So like Kelly's communications classes and my ethics classes and things like that, where people have come back and said, it's helped me in my family life. It's helped me in my organizational life away from the fire service. And it applies to both volunteers and career firefighters. It doesn't, if you draw a paycheck from the fire service, leadership is leadership in the fire service. Doesn't make a difference. Mentoring is mentoring. It doesn't make a difference if they're drawing a paycheck. So we really, like I said at the very beginning, this was a labor of love for both of us. It's something we talked about for a long time doing. The pandemic kind of finally pushed us to sit down and start putting it together. And we feel very strongly that this will be not only a useful book for people, but an enjoyable book.
Well, from what I've read, I love those first few chapters. I love how you begin with the stories. I think people relate instead of to a textbook that you have to read, a cold textbook. That's what I call, biology textbook, chemistry textbook, math textbook. I think this is the kind of book that people can sit back and read and enjoy and learn from it at the same time, because of the real stories that occurred, and then how you provide that analysis with it, and then the coaching at the end of it, the coaching questions, because they're able to grow and they can do it at their own pace and learn, and then they can always go back to it and say, oh, what was that one? What was that one? I can find it. Oh, there's that chapter 9. That was it. That was the one I wanted, because they had read it once and they found something in it that was meaningful to them. And whether it helps them, as you said, for self-improvement, or it helps them on the way to promotion, that doesn't make a difference, as long as it helps the person, the reader, and they get something out of it. That's all we can ask for.
The book's release is tomorrow, Wednesday the 28th, on Amazon. You can look it up by the title, Facing the Fire, or you can look it up by Kelly or I's name as the authors, and has a great foreword by Dennis Compton. We appreciate the support of anybody who can go on there tomorrow and download a Kindle version, take advantage of the 99-cent version. It'll only last for a few days, and then the price will go up to the normal price. But take advantage of it. Use it to supplement your career. Use it to supplement your life, and draw on the lessons that we share, because they're universal.
They are, and I love what you just said. Supplement your life with this learning tool. To you, Chief, and to you, Kelly, I can't thank you enough for honoring us for this announcement. I was so excited when you reached out to do it, and I'm glad we were able to get it done with our viewers here, and then we'll get the audio up as quickly as we can as well. They might miss that 99-cent, but they won't miss the lessons that we talked about, and then they can go out and buy the book itself. And that's the most important thing, is not just them buying on the 99-cent level, but finding the book and getting it so they can learn from it and improve themselves, and then go from there. Because when we build that confidence inside and they don't hide in the shell, they're willing to crawl out and say, oh, maybe I can advance. Maybe I could be a lieutenant. Maybe I could be a captain.
Maybe they can
Even higher.
be brave and take
Exactly.
that step.
Yeah, be brave. As Chief, as you said, we're ready to knock down a door and go in through a house full of fire. We're just a hose line and a tick in our hands.
Yep.
But we're afraid to say, maybe I could be a lieutenant. Nah, that doesn't work. If you can go through the fire, and then you can better yourself, improve yourself, and move ahead.
That's kind of what the title of the book about, facing the fire.
The
We face the flames, but do we face the fire of an irate employee, or an upset citizen, or a difficult decision, or a difficult conversation that has to be held? And as we said in the beginning, that takes courage too.
It sure does.
Leadership courage is, it's just a different kind of courage, but it's still courage.
And as the subtitle says, Facing the Fire, Stories to Ignite Leadership Excellence. I think that's what they have to hear. Leadership excellence, these are the stories you can learn from. These are the people you can learn from. And we are honored that you joined us today for this announcement. And we wish you every good luck, every good wish for the success of this book and the continued success of your teaching in your academies that I know you've done around the country, in person, online during the pandemic, and hopefully we'll be back in person in the near future.
Yeah, we're looking forward to the pandemic winding down, and Kelly and I being able to get back out and interact directly in person with fire departments and fire officers and aspiring fire officers. One thing that helps Kelly and I with our motivation, quite frankly, is as we have interacted with our students, and they come from big departments and little departments, and they're chiefs and lieutenants and firefighters who hope to be lieutenants and chiefs, the enthusiasm for leadership development that we encounter really pumps Kelly and I up. And almost every class we have, we say, at the end of it, we say, boy, that was the best class yet. Great discussions, great insight by the students, great enthusiasm for leadership. And so they motivate us. It's not just us trying to motivate them. They motivate us to share their lessons and go on. And here as we wind down, Steve, I want to say too that Kelly and I wanted to make this announcement with 5 Alarm Task Force and you. We believe in your mission. You've been a supporter of ours from the beginning. You have a great audience that I think is shared because some of our students are also part of your audience. And so we thank you for hosting us and being the place where this effort of ours, this book and our classes, bravefireleader.com, where we get to announce these things. So thank you, Steve.
Well,
and your readers should know that Steve doesn't feel very good today, but he was committed to doing this to help us announce this book tomorrow. And so everybody out there, think some positive thoughts and pray a little prayer for Steve to feel better. And thank you, Steve, for soldiering through and doing this podcast on a day you probably would have rather just kicked back and took it easy.
Well, it's an honor and a pleasure anytime you are on the show as guests. But to me, this was great. This was probably one of the pinnacles of my podcast career, is to be with you together for this announcement. So I thank you very much for honoring me by doing it here. I hope it won't be a year before we're together again, whether we're on Zoom or whether we're live, whatever the case may be. But I look forward to our next meeting, and I wish you all the luck, both of you, all the luck with the book and with the continued classes, because I know how valuable your leadership skills are to teach leadership skills to others and show them that there is a pathway. All they have to do is say, I want to take it.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you, Steve, very much.
Our pleasure. Folks, if you're watching the video, this will be the end of the program. If you're listening to the audio, we'll be right back right after these words. As always, please stay tuned. For those of you leaving us, thank you for tuning in. We certainly appreciate it. Stay safe and stay well.